the witnesses, it's timely for us to be doing this hearing right now in the week in which President Trump has announced a new nominee for the Supreme Court, someone who will protect the 5-4 Republican phalanx that has so reliably delivered decision after decision after decision for the Republican Party's election interests and for the big corporations' financial interests. So we have a lot that is relevant to today's conversation because the Janus case is very much in that tradition. It began with a highly unusual invitation by one of the 5 Republican justices on the Supreme Court to challenge this aspect of a decision that was what in their confirmation guides the Republican judges would all call, binding precedent. We need to follow precedent. It's part of our conservative doctrine that we must follow precedent. Then, of course, they got on the court and smashed precedent left, right, and center on their way to delivering the results for Republican election interests and corporate financial interests. So we're getting a little tired of seeing that. This then rolled on with essentially faux litigation, with faux parties backed by big Republican special interests bringing cases that they asked to lose so they could move rapidly through the litigation process to their destination at the Supreme Court, where they believed that 5 welcoming justices awaited them to deliver the promised outcome. Of course, the death of Justice Scalia interfered with that little scheme, and at 4-4, the challenge failed, but it took almost zero time after Gorsuch was put on the court for those same big Republican dark money interests to gin the litigation back up and come racing back to the court now with new plaintiffs with equally questionable standing. But the court overlooked all of those problems because it had a pet political project, which was to get rid of this source of funding for unions. And that's where we are today. It rolls over from the political into the personal, and we have the Teacher of the Year from Arizona and a home care worker as well to talk a little bit about the personal side. But let me ask Professor Nancy McLean, the author of a terrific book about dark money influence and the way in which very, very big money has infiltrated our public debate over many, many years and tried to control the narrative for big special interests. So we'll start with Professor McLean, the author of Democracy in Chains, a truly wonderful book.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Whitehouse and Senator Stabenow, who I understand will be with us presently, for inviting me to participate in this crucial conversation. I'm Nancy McLean, a U.S. historian at Duke University and the author, most recently, as Senator Whitehouse said, of a book called Democracy in Chains that bears directly on our topic. I've spent the better part of the last decade researching and unraveling the historical roots of the ideas that the libertarian radical right, funded by Charles Koch and his network of dark money donors, are applying to transform our country. This anti-democratic libertarian right consists of literally hundreds of organizations, including national bodies such as the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and the Federalist Society, state-level organizations whose work is aligned through the State Policy Network, organizing enterprises, including Americans for Prosperity, Concerned Veterans of America, the Libre Initiative, and Generation Opportunity, and campus-based centers of allied faculty. Most of us who are critical of the changes coming from today's right have not really grasped what this vast apparatus is seeking. In fact, one top Koch official gloated at a donor summit in late 2015 that, and I quote, "We're close to winning," while the network's critics, he said, still don't have the real path. I found that path in my research, so I would like to open today by identifying some key elements of this cause's belief system and then discussing what that means for policymakers here in Washington. Without this broader understanding, we tend to view cases like Janus in isolation. Let me explain. Many Americans have interpreted the Janus decision as a pure and simple case of union busting. However, This litigation was a crucial piece of the radical right's stealth plan to take power out of the hands of ordinary citizens and public officials alike and make sure that that power never returns by radically altering the rules of our democracy as enshrined in our Constitution. Stealth is critical to their success. I learned from reading thousands of pages of documents that this cause has produced over a half century. Why? Because they understand that the only way they can achieve their radical anti-democratic transformation of American government is by putting their plan in place, piece by piece, without announcing their true intent. In setting all this in motion, in fact, 2 decades ago, Charles Koch began with the presumption that, and I quote, "We are greatly outnumbered. We are greatly outnumbered. To win, therefore, he said his cause must overwhelm the other side with what he termed interrelated plays." So let me guide you to 6 key elements of the radical right's overarching vision, which link the linked plays that we have been seeing in this country, especially since 2009. First, market forces should alone determine social outcomes, with no interference from government. Government has only 3 legitimate roles for this cause: enforce the law, ensure social order, and defend us from foreign enemies. Everything else should in time be eliminated because it interferes with property rights and economic liberty. Second, any attempt by the people to use their numbers to modify markets, as labor unions and government policies like minimum wages do, is illegitimate and akin to gangsterism. The Koch team believes that we should only have the right to act as individuals, not muster any collective countervailing power to that of corporations, as Americans have been accustomed to doing for generations. Free speech is not the end goal of the Janus case. That goal is breaking down the collective power to block implementation of the radical libertarian program, including ultimately privatization of public education, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and more. Third, democracy does not require majority rule. In fact, democracy is not an especially desirable form of decision-making. The radical anti-democratic libertarian cause believes in unanimity. Only if everyone, above all the very wealthiest among us, supports a particular policy and voluntarily agrees to pay for it, can it be said to be truly representing the common good. That's why Koch-allied organizations and elected officials are working so hard to limit voting by those most likely to oppose their agenda, including African Americans, Latinos, low-income whites, and young people of all groups. Fourth, elected officials do not really care about the common good. They only care about getting reelected, using other people's money to dole out favors to ensure that. That's why we have deficits, even in times of prosperity. Fifth, because the people cannot be trusted to restrain their claims on the wealthy, and elected officials cannot be trusted with the power to tax and spend, ironclad binding restraints must be put on both. The Nobel Prize-winning economist, whose ideas have been weaponized by the Koch network, James McGill Buchanan, said the changes were so extensive that they amounted to, in his words, a constitutional revolution. That revolution would put shackles on what government could do, including by making mandatory balanced budgets, mandatory, imposing congressional term limits, limiting the right to vote, and requiring vast supermajorities for any change of substance after the constitutional revolution. Sixth, and perhaps most telling, the only way to achieve all this is by stealth, spreading misinformation, like the myth of mass voter fraud, and relying initially on the branch of government that is easiest for corporations to capture and deploy. That is state government, as shown by my own state of North Carolina, a prime laboratory of all this. Since the 2010 midterms and the great gerrymander that followed, state policy networks in North Carolina, funded by the Koch's longtime partner, Art Pope, and allied elected officials, have turned a once moderate state that was a beacon to the wider South into a competitor with Alabama and Mississippi, for which will do less for its people. And to keep future voters from reversing all the radical changes they've made, they have put not one, but 6 constitutional amendments on the docket this fall, including voter ID and a cap on top income rates. With these elements of the endgame and grand strategy as context, let me turn in conclusion to 3 key implications of what I have outlined. First, what has made this audacious enterprise possible and ever more effective is something that we have never seen before in American history. That is, a concerted project by one extremely right-wing multi-billionaire who has taken it upon himself and the network he has built to radically alter our world. Let's be clear. Never before has this much money, this much time, and this much political power been wielded on behalf of individuals who are unelected and unaccountable to the people. Second, gaining control of the courts is vital to this project, because the courts will decide how the law is going to be applied in the battle against democracy as we know it. The aim is to radically rewrite the overall rules of how our democracy works on everything from how we vote to what we are allowed to vote on and how we are represented. One of the greatest victories in this quest to capture the courts would be something almost no one has been talking about this last week. But it's a key part of why the Koch network is spending millions of dollars to get the president's Supreme Court nominee confirmed in short order. The Koch cause seeks to gut the interpretation of the Constitution's Commerce Clause that has enabled all federal regulation since the 1930s. As the Koch-allied legal strategist behind the First Amendment attack on public sector unions explained, and I quote, "We want to withdraw judicial support for the entire modern welfare state." My last and final point in light of all this: what should be the goal of those who believe in government of, by, and for the people? Inform, inform, inform. Of course, inform your own colleagues and members and constituents, but do not stop there. All Americans need to understand how this libertarian ethical system is at odds with our political traditions and the best of every major religion in the world. I'll close as I started. The Janus ruling cannot be fully understood without recognizing the larger radical right minority project that produced it. If that project is not stopped, and soon, by making use of the democratic tools that we still have, we will find ourselves living in a country that none of us would recognize, and one that by design will be almost impossible to change, even with supermajority demand for it. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Professor McLean. We also have Christine Marsh here, who teaches high school English at Cactus Shadows High School in Arizona. As a member of the National Education Association, she sees firsthand the effects of Janus. She was the Arizona Teacher of the Year in 2016 and a Democratic candidate for the Arizona State Senate now, and we welcome her to this proceeding. Ms. Marsh.
Thank you, Senators, for giving teachers a voice in this very important discussion. My classroom is set up in a circle, kind of like this, very much for that reason of giving students a voice. I want my students to know that they have a voice and to know that their voice matters. The same philosophy has propelled me through 26 years of teaching, and it is probably one of the reasons that I was named 2016 Arizona Teacher of the Year. Giving teachers a voice is one of the reasons I have belonged to the National Education Association and the Arizona Education Association for 26 years. During my tenure as Teacher of the Year, I went to the Arizona State Capitol almost every single week, where I met with legislators and testified before committees. Someone from AEA was almost always there. They were there fighting for our students just as I was. Witnessing that firsthand has made me an even more loyal member. In the post-Janus world, I expect educator activism to grow. I know from firsthand experience that teachers are not going away and are not going to be silent. And if anything, they've started to recognize the stealth that Professor McLean has referenced. This spring, before Janus was decided, the AEA teamed up with the hashtag Red for Ed movement. For the first time in Arizona history, educators walked out of their classrooms and gathered at the Capitol to protest working and learning conditions. Nearly 70,000 people, mostly teachers, took part in the week-long protest. It helped them realize that they do have this voice that I referenced earlier and that they can indeed use that voice. Now the numbers of educators involved in related activities like ballot initiatives and legislative campaigns continues to grow in Arizona. The Red for Ed movement gives me hope, and I hope it gives some of you hope as well. And we need that hope in this post-Janus world, a world in which teachers, and indeed all public employees, are under attack. In response, we are becoming more engaged, speaking out, and organizing both locally and nationally. As we have seen in Arizona and on a national level, we are fighting groups with endless amounts of money that, again, Professor McLean has referenced, and they will not be giving up their attacks. But we also know that no amount of money can silence America's teachers. We will continue to fight to keep public education thriving and ensure that educators and students get the respect that they deserve. I'd like to close by thanking you again for inviting me, and by extension, teachers in general, to be here, and by assuring you that educators will fight any and all attacks on public education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marsh. We are delighted to be joined by Ms. Melody Benjamin, who is a member of SEIU and is a home care worker in Illinois. She wrote an op-ed earlier this year featured in The Hill that discussed the difficulties of serving as a home care worker and discussed the attacks on home care worker unions. Ms. Benjamin, please proceed.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melody Benjamin. I am a home care worker from Chicago's West Side. I'm also a proud member of SEIU Healthcare Illinois. Senator Whitehouse, I just want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to allow me to let you know why the importance of having a union means to working people like myself, and why the efforts to divide us and destroy unions by corporate powerful interests that hurt our country. In our union, we have a saying as home care workers, invisible no more. And that's because before that, brave home care workers back in the late 80s organized other home care workers. They was only making as little as $1 an hour. And no one will recognize basically how hard of the work that it is and demanding that it is, and basically give us real wages. And over the years, as more home care workers have joined together in my union, we continue to speak out for better wages, training, and other improvements for the work that we love. Alone, we are invisible, but together, we're unstoppable. Like men and women will provide essential care that allows seniors and people with disabilities to live in their home. I didn't choose this profession. It chose me. I was 28 years old when I was studying to become a surgical technologist back in 2008, when my mom started getting sick. As the years passed by, she later had to have a bypass surgery on both legs because her arteries had blockage. After that day, both of our lives changed forever. My mom could no longer live alone. I left school and became a full-time home care worker. At that time, I was only making $11.55 with no benefits. Of course, caring for my mom is a 24-hour job, but I only get paid. I don't get paid as much for overtime, and I'm underpaid. And most time I have to babysit just to do a side job, just to make ends meet. So I joined the union not only just to have better wages, but I joined the union to basically for other working people just like myself as home care providers. So basically we're awfully underpaid and overworked. I quickly found out that my union was doing so much and making a difference in this industry. Through my union, we were working to lift up other home care providers out of poverty. Together with senior and disability allies, we joined forces and we started advocating for better wages, increase more training, different opportunities, and affordable health care. Right now, I'm at $13 an hour, and we're shooting for $15 an hour. My union also gave me a sense of hope, because when I started this program, I thought I was alone and struggling. And then my union coming out, I actually met other home care workers providers that do the same work that I do and is going through the same struggles that I go through. Together, we identified what needs to be changed in this profession, and that give me the confidence to talk to my elected officials, my family members, and my neighbors to create a home care program and system that works for everyone. In this industry, it is plagued by high turnover rates. We are fighting for advancement that will help attract and retain more home care workers just as the demand is exploding. Just consider 10,000 people turn 65 every day. Also consider that this is the fastest paced growing jobs in the country. There's not simply enough home care workers. Well-trained, well-paid workers. We have a care crisis. We have a care crisis. You would think that people who are serious about solving these crises would support our right and choose to join unions and make our jobs better and improve care, right? Wrong. Billionaire-funded extremist groups like State Policy Network and Freedom Foundation have launched serious aggressive attacks on working people like myself. These attacks include using power and influence to push cases like Harris versus Quinn, Janus versus AFSCME to the Supreme Court, funding efforts to dismantle the foundation that helps support a thriving middle class that we all count on to be there. This includes efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act with no replacement and decimate Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. And using this with the rhetoric, rhetoric comments basically trying to keep us silent. President Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh last night and confirming that he will be further rig the economy of democracy against working people. Judge Kavanaugh has sided time and time again with employees against working people like myself. As you and your colleagues consider Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, please don't forget that the decision directly affects me and my community. The Supreme Court may make decisions here in Washington, D.C., but the rest of the world has to live with the consequences. So in my closing, and no amount of money, dark money, will stop us. We will continue to fight to improve care we provide and that we love. Fighting to protect Medicaid for the people we care for. The freedom to come together in a union is a basic right, and it's about our future as home care workers, as well as how our country will take care of our seniors and loved ones. And we ask you to stand with us and stand up for those who use their wealth and power to silence working people like myself. And by making it easier for working people everywhere to join the union and have their voices heard, and so we won't be invisible no more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benjamin. I really appreciate that. And Ms. Weingarten has arrived. Her timing is perfect. She's still getting herself a little bit sorted out in her seat, so I'll let her take a quick breath. Randi Weingarten taught history at Clara Barton High School in Brooklyn and rose to become the president of the United Federation of Teachers, AFT Local 2, representing teachers throughout the New York City public school system. She is now the national president of the American Federation of Teachers, representing a significant population that is directly affected by the Janus decision And we are delighted that you are here to make your comments. Let me say that the order of arrival is Senator Klobuchar, Senator Shaheen, Senator Udall, Senator Reid, Senator Hirono, Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Hassan, and Senator Murray. And at the conclusion of Ms. Weingarten's remarks, I'll turn to Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. So I am honored to be here, and I am here on the eve of our convention, which is happening in Pittsburgh. And what we are seeing is an amazing sense from our members that they are sticking with the union. Something has shifted in the last few weeks and months. I frankly, in the 20 years of the 25 years of union advocacy that I have done, I have never seen what I am seeing right now. So I want to start with, there's a lot of hope in a very terrifying and dark period of time. We're a union of teachers, bus drivers, school staff, nurses, and health professionals, college faculty, and adjuncts and public employees. And what this year we talk about is caring, fighting, and showing up, not just for our members, but for the communities we serve. And ultimately, this is the through line that we have been seeing, not just in the states where there were teacher walkouts, but through millennials, others. People get that unions are still the best vehicle working people have to make a difference in their lives and in their workplaces. And unions, as all of you know, negotiate everything from manageable class sizes to safe staffing levels at healthcare facilities to ensuring that special needs kids have the services they need, to safety on the job, to safety in communities. Workers covered by union contracts earn somewhere between 13 and 20% more on average than non-workers, and they're more likely to have health insurance, paid leave, and retirement benefits. But what we're seeing is that even in the places where the lowest density, where there is very little that helps people in terms of law, like in West Virginia, like in Oklahoma, like in Arizona, people are willing to reject despair as a strategy and are saying enough is enough. But what we've also seen is that the states that most of you come from, the states that have still invested, are also the states that have the greatest union density and the best services. And the flip side is also obvious. So simply put, what we've seen even today in diminished union density, that stronger unions equal stronger communities. And it's not just that our members get it, communities get it. Even in this hugely polarized country we have right now, after in the midst of the teacher strikes, we saw from AP polls and other polls, not our polls, that people supported teacher unions and agreed that teachers were not paid enough. That's a huge difference than 10 years ago. The Janus case came out as we expected, but Justice Kagan nailed it in her dissent when she said that her colleagues, her conservative colleagues, were overthrowing a decision entrenched in this nation's law and in its economic life for over 40 years. As a result, it prevents the American people acting through their state and local officials from making important choices about workplace governance. And it was her words, not my words, when she said the majority was weaponizing the First Amendment, an amendment perverting the amendment that is intended to secure political freedom necessary for democracy, not an amendment that was ever intended to equate money to speech, as Senator Whitehouse has said. Let me just end in my last minute with what I started with. So the same day that Janus was decided, 2,400 faculty at Oregon State University joined the AFT. And right now, we are at our largest numbers ever. And we have been preparing for this for quite a while. And what it's done for us, it has changed the nature of our union from where the members saw that they outsourced their power to their elected leaders, to where the members now see their power is within themselves. And as a result, before the decision of the 800,000 people who are affected by this, over 530,000 have already signed new union cards. The day after the decision, the Mackinac Center, supported by Betsy DeVos and the Koch brothers, spammed teacher emails across the country, school emails, by the way, across the country. One should actually wonder how that was allowed. And what has happened is that people are pissed that they would actually use their school emails, and regardless, in a union meeting, if there's 10 people there, you're going to get 20 opinions. But what they don't want is the Koch brothers or the DeVos family to take away their power and their rights. And that is what we're seeing. People are not dropping, they're joining. And we are seeing, you hear the defiance in my voice? It's because we are seeing that people are sticking to their union, sticking with their union, because they understand that what we can do together is impossible for people to do alone. Thank you.
Ms. Weingarten, we've been joined by Senator Murphy. Before we begin with Senator Klobuchar, we are joined by Senator Murray, who is the ranking member on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which is highly relevant to these groups. And is also a senior member of the Democratic leadership in the Senate. And I'd like to invite her to make an opening statement.
Well, thank you. I'll just say a few things. Senator Whitehouse, thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today to share your stories on how special dark interest money campaigns are really hurting our workers and our unions and our economy. We all know that for more than a century, unions have organized to lift up the voices of regular average workers who otherwise would not be heard, and fought for fair pay and safe working conditions and better benefits. We know that unions help create the 40-hour work week and end child labor and strengthen middle class. They are an essential part of our families and our economy here in this country. We know, Randy, that unions are still empowering workers every day to have a better workplace and better pay, and including, by the way, the countless teachers who we have been so amazed to watch. But meanwhile, we are seeing corporate special interests have spent billions of dollars on political campaigns and lawsuits that are designed to chip away these workers' rights over the past few decades. We've seen a decline in union membership. I'm excited if this is going to create a backlash to that. But as a result, we're seeing wages really stagnant for our families. And meanwhile, the billionaires, of course, are getting richer. So this is a very important hearing, and we appreciate your participation. And I do want to mention the Supreme Court, because obviously we're here talking because of Janus. But we also now have a new nominee. And I have to say, Judge Kavanaugh has a very long history of ruling in favor of corporations and big businesses at the expense of our workers. And the lives of millions of people are at stake with this nomination. So we're fighting back, but we need people to understand this, and your voices will be critical. And finally, I just want to say I've been very proud to introduce the Workers' Freedom to Negotiate Act and to co-sponsor Senator Hirono's Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act. We understand how important this is, and your help, your stories, your compelling testimony will help us make the case. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Senator Murray. The order is Klobuchar, Shaheen, Udall, Reed, Hirono, Cortez Masto, Hassan, Murray, Merkley, Van Hollen, and Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Whitehouse, for holding this important hearing. And then also I wanted to mention Senator Hirono's fine work with the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor. So I got excited listening to you, Ms. Weingarten. And I was myself looking at some of Justice Kagan's remarks, including what she said during the oral argument, where she said 23 states would have their statutes declared unconstitutional, thousands of municipalities, contracts invalidated. Those contracts probably cover millions, maybe over 10 million workers. So I am so glad to hear that people are sticking with, in fact, joining the union. But what are some of the strategies that you are employing to deal with this, not only from a union perspective, but for your incredible members and for teachers across the country, even those not in your union. So thank you for that. Let me know.
So I actually think it comes down to one word: engagement. It's member engagement, it's community involvement, it's people understanding what the stakes are, it's creating pathways of it's getting through the fear and the frustration and the polarization and recreating trust. So in February 2015, Lee Saunders came to one of our executive council meetings. Lee Saunders is president of AFSCME. And we had a really intense conversation about how to re-engage in a different kind of way, how to disrupt this notion, as I said in my testimony, that the leader can do it all for the members, how to create different kinds of pathways of engagement. And we started with one-to-one conversations. And we have had over 1 million one-to-one conversations. But in January of this year, from February 2015 onward, from January of this year, given what we saw in the briefs in the Supreme Court, we said, let's not wait to re-sign up people. Let's actually take the risk of having a recommitment strategy in the 23 states. And so that gave us a really good way of doing education and of also engagement. And so, yes, we're also doing a clearinghouse and legal work. And yesterday, for example, we had a conversation with about 60,000 members that Denise Speck from Ed Minnesota was on, Andy Pilata was on, our leaders from a couple of other states were on. So we're doing all the other things you would expect, but it's really this engagement that is the key strategy.
Okay, thank you. Helpful. Professor McLean, thank you for your good work. And you made this case for the democracy as a whole. As you know, the nominee, a lot have been focused on health care, but I think you look at the pattern of his decisions. One of them was actually to find the Consumer Protection Bureau unconstitutional, something that was set up to save average Americans from bad behavior of Wall Street banks and the like. Could you talk about how you see this as connected to those legal fights over the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau?
Yeah, so I think that there is a challenge in that the two sides in American politics are looking at these issues. Oh, sorry. Look, the two sides in American politics are looking at these issues of the court in quite different ways. So what one sees on the moderate, liberal, democratic side is a focus on particular issues, right? Whether it's health care or it's abortion or it's, workers' rights or other things. What you see happening on the right, though, is a very systematic and steady focus on framework, the framework that supports all of those issues. So for myself, as a historian, I am concerned as I watch the national discussion about this judicial nominee and about this long conservative legal movement that has been so heavily funded by the dark money network convened by Charles Koch and by other partners in these operations, that people are not getting that this is really an effort to transform the constitutional framework of our country. These are very smart people, right? Very strategic. So it's a long game. It's an integrated plan. You don't go to the most extreme thing right away, but it is systematic. I want to just give you another quote from someone involved in this network so you'll understand how they feel about things like the Affordable Care Act, which to millions of Americans meant they got health care for the first time. They didn't get rejected because they had a pre-existing condition. Their children could get health care. All of those things that people in this room regard. Here is what the legal strategist who started the Friedrichs case, founded the Center for Individual Rights, said of the ACA. I won't use the first word because it is a word that I shouldn't use on television. But he said this X has to be killed as a matter of political hygiene. I do not care how it is done, whether it's dismembered, whether we drive a stake through its heart, whether we tar and feather it and drive it out of town, or whether we strangle it. Now, this is a law professor in a Koch-funded law program, the Scalia School of Law at George Mason University, talking about a bill that brought health care to millions of Americans. Wow. I think that tells us a lot about the strategy of this network, which ultimately, as the same individual said, wants to undermine the judicial framework for the entire modern welfare state and regulation. And it sounds so extreme that people don't believe you. Trust me, I had those moments when I was doing this research. I said, this can't possibly be happening, but it is.
And we need to recognize what just happened last night.
Absolutely,
so I'm not going to ask any more questions.
Absolutely, it does.
But I want to also thank you for your good work teaching. My mom, as Ms. Weingarten knows, taught school till she was 70, a proud member of her union. So thank you for that, and thank you also, Ms. Benjamin, for your work. And I'll ask you about the silver surge, what we're seeing later, the aging community, and how that's going to affect the need for care workers like yourself, and how it becomes even more relevant. So thank you.
Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you very much for holding the hearing, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony. Professor McLean, I want to follow up on the point you just made, which is, as you say, the average American doesn't believe that this is happening.
Yes.
And one of the challenges that we have is how to convey to them that this is real and that we really do need to do something about it. And I was particularly struck by your last comment that if we don't do something soon, it will be irreversible. So have you thought about how to get across the message to Americans that this is happening and how to persuade them that it's real?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And I can say, I don't know that my experience is necessarily representative, but I have been traveling around the country over the last year since this book came out, talking to all kinds of audiences in different parts of the country. And I have been stunned and inspired by the degree to which Americans from all walks of life, all sectors of commitment, different kinds of churches, community organizations, unions, civil rights groups, women, people are understanding that something is going radically wrong in our society, that our democracy is being rigged, is being strangled in different ways. I find that people in red states like my own North Carolina and like your Arizona understand this particularly well because they've seen this happen with measure after measure after measure, many of them done in secret, in the dark, without the usual procedures. So I think the American people might understand more than we give them credit for and than the pollsters give them credit for, because I don't even know that the pollsters know how to ask the questions to get to people's sense that this system is rigged. But I do think it is quite interesting that the two of the surprise presidential candidates in the 2016 election both had a message that the system is rigged, and that was quite resonant with the American people. So I think it's extremely important that we approach this with a sense of how much we have built together as a people over the years, how much we have done from every, we used to have rivers that started on fire. Remember the Cuyahoga River? We don't have that anymore. And we have so many other things that we've done together, but I don't think we've taken adequate credit for those or helped the American people understand how important government is to that, the representatives that we elect and the work that they do. So I think it's very important to reclaim that and reshape the national conversation so that people understand if we're not in this together as a democracy, we are all on our own. You are on your own for everything. And if this Koch-led cause, this libertarian cause, wins and achieves what it wants to, you will be on your own for everything. To pay for your children's education, because it will be private and there will be no public provision, to pay for your retirement, because they will have privatized Social Security and Medicare, to pay for your health care, and to not be able to look to your fellow citizens for help. So I think that this is just such a radical vision that if Americans understood it, they would stop it. And I think that's why this cause operates in stealth, because they know that too.
Well, sadly, the master rigger won the election. So we have to get through that challenge first. Let me thank both Ms. March and Ms. Benjamin. Ms. Benjamin, what you said about home care workers is absolutely true. Every time I go home to New Hampshire, I hear that we don't have enough, and people have to leave because they can't afford to stay in the field. And of course, with teachers, we know that we need more teachers. Ms. Weingarten knows that as well. And I started my career as a teacher, so I have real appreciation for what teachers do. Can I ask Ms. March and Ms. Benjamin if both of you could talk about what a difference being part of a union has made to you in your career and your ability to stay in your field?
Basically, being in a union has empowered me not only to be a strong voice for my family and my communities, but as well as for my other home care workers that provide the same care that I do. I joined SEIU because I wanted to be a part of the union. I wanted to be a part of the change. The work that we do is very vital, and it's just, we're able to join collectively and have better wages and benefits. Health care that some people just take for granted. Health care is big, and SEIU has provided that because members like me stood up and basically we bargained for it. It give us the right, for $15 an hour to have a living wage. They already passed it in Massachusetts, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Los Angeles. This gives us hope as home care workers that if we stick together and have a unity and the people power, we can change bills, we can change laws, and we can make people's lives better.
Thank you. Ms.
Thank
Mark.
you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So being in the union has, as I kind of alluded to in my speech, certainly given me a voice, certainly has given other teachers a voice. But I'm going to actually go to one specific anecdote that kind of delineates the power of unions, period. In the spring in Arizona, the Red for Ed movement was taking off, which was actually kind of going around the country. And that was pretty much grassroots. AEA, the Arizona Education Association, came in and supported as Red for Ed, which was just grassroots teachers who had had enough, finally started to realize the stealth and recognize the nonsense that's happening. So this grassroots group is rising up without the infrastructure to really do anything, to rent porta potties at the Capitol, for example, to have, the resources to buy enough water to make 60 or 70,000 people safe. So AEA came in and offered that foundational support for this grassroots movement. And that is on a big scale pretty much what the union has done throughout my entire teaching career, on, of course, a much smaller scale. But it's that same concept of allowing the voices to come forth by providing the foundation and support that individual teachers or even a big group of teachers need in order to be effective.
Senator
Thank you
Udall.
all.
Thank you, Sheldon, for calling us together, and for Debbie also. All four of your stories, coming from a little bit different perspective, are just inspirational. Hearing you echo, I don't remember the "Sticking with the Union" song, but it was a Woody Guthrie or okay. It's a wonderful theme. It's a wonderful theme, and I'm wondering if you, Ms. Benjamin and Ms. Marsh, have you seen that? What she's talking about is that over the last 17 months and this Janus decision and the things that have come down, are average grassroots folks getting riled up and really wanting to fight back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a word, yes.
Yes. Okay.
The teachers are woke.
Yeah.
As the kids would say.
And because of your action, there's absolutely no doubt, is there, that that's why you got that 20% raise in Arizona. I mean, that's
well,
what
it's
you
not
all were
20%.
fighting.
That's part of the false narrative. But yes,
Yeah.
why we got that 9%.
I wish it was 20%.
Yes, right. But yes, that is why we got a significant raise.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say yes, too. Home care workers are fired up. We're basically on the grounds, knocking on doors in our communities, talking to other home care workers and letting them know how valuable the union is. And basically, that's our only platform, because ain't nobody else giving us no platform to make it, to have a better wage, a living wage, benefits. So, they get it. Once you talk to them, they get it. And once you explain to them and let them know how it's going to affect them directly, they get it. And they fired up, and they're ready to roll. We're ready to roll. We're not going to stop.
That's great. That's great. Professor McLean, you talked a lot about the Koch brothers and the secret money and how they're hiding it all. And this question goes to both you and Randy very quickly. It seems to me that if you add all the money up, if you had a scale, I mean, it's hard to detect it, but you all are in the field and fighting the battle. My sense is we're being totally outgunned on the money. Is that your sense? If you add all the right-wing money, these right-wing organizations, talk radio, all the things like the universities, everything you're talking about, and then add up what we're doing on our side for working people, and what do you think we should be doing about it? Both of you.
So, look, once Citizens United happened, we were going to be outgunned by money from the get-go.
Yeah.
But I think we're outgunned by one other thing, which is what I see changing right now, which is frustration and despair. Because that's what Donald Trump did and what the right wing does. They use the dog whistle, they use despair, they use fear. So it, in some ways, immobilizes people. And what, as Christine was saying, when you have that human shield in Arizona, if you were on the ground in Arizona, in Oklahoma, in West Virginia, the human shield of that many people wearing the same color created a political necessity for these right-wing governments to do something. And so it really is this kind of old-time people versus money. So I think we have to do three things at the same time. Number one, we have to call them out. And in our space, people get it about Betsy DeVos, frankly, because of the amazing hearings that Senator Murray and others did in her nomination. They get it about her. They don't. The Koch brothers have now become a household name. We are doing what Professor McLean talked about before. We are exposing them. And so the education is important. And the second thing that's important is, and I'm sorry I'm a broken record about this, is the engagement and connecting the dots and connecting it to the things that matter to people, like the fight on pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, I think a tremendous amount of money is being spent on the right, as you say, that doesn't have a counterpart on the other side. And yet I would agree with Randy to say that the old adage says there's two sources of power, right? Money and people. And the reason that this Koch network has mobilized billionaires and multimillionaires in the way that they have is because they disagree with the majority, a majority who believes in Social Security, that believes in public education, that wants action on the climate, that wants to support teachers, and all of these other things. They understand they can't persuade that majority, so they are trying to go around that majority by funding all these organizations, by operating in stealth, by misleading people about the climate, about voting, et cetera. So I do think that we need to keep in mind that there is this latent majority that can be activated in the ways that my union friends here at the table are talking about. And we also, though, I think, could think more strategically going forward, because there's so many good people on the other side who are focused, say, on the issues of the homeless, or who are focused on issues involving police violence or women's rights, or, what have you. And we tend to be in silos, right? And we tend to be not in conversation, not in any kind of alignment. And I think one challenge that this threat to our democracy presents to us, but also maybe creates an opportunity for us, is that we have to recover a narrative of who we are as a people, right? And as a majority together, and the things we share, the values we share, our commitment to fairness, to transparency, et cetera. So I think we can do that. I think also, though, as we do this work of organizing that people are talking about, we also have to pay a lot of attention to this rules change, because that is the strategy of the other side. And the person that I wrote about who trained these folks said, If you don't like the outcome of public policy over a long period of time, and the libertarians don't like the 20th century, and I'm serious, if you don't like the outcome of public policy over a long period of time, stop thinking about who rules and think about the rules, right? And so the strategy on their side is not to talk about personalities or who's going to be in office, but who's going to get them the framework changes they want. And so I just think we have to also be laser focused on these rules changes like Janus in order to stave off this effort.
Thank
Senator
you.
Hirono.
Thank you very much for gathering all of us. There's no question that these kinds of rules changes has been a decades-long effort by the extremely conservative groups in our country with a lot of money. And in fact, millions of dollars were spent just to get Neil Gorsuch on the court, and they're not going to stop with Gorsuch. So I did want to acknowledge Senator Murray's bill that would strengthen the National Labor Relations Act, and I just wanted to mention that there is the counterpoint to that, which is the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act, which many of my colleagues, 33 of my Senate colleagues, have joined me, and basically this act sets some minimum standards that all states should follow to enable public sector workers to unionize for better pay and working conditions. So, that's a really important marker for us to put, and I do thank all of you for being here, and I'm really glad that the teachers are woke. They've been really leading the charge with all of their walkouts and all of that. I think it brings to the fore how important it is that our public sector unions and our workers provide the kind of services that we all rely upon every single day. I did want to ask Ms. Benjamin, thank you very much, particularly for you being here. I don't know how many home care workers are members of SEIU versus the number of home care workers there are in this country. I am very aware of the importance of home care workers because in my own family, I have a home care person who comes to my house to take care of my mother 12 hours a day, every day. And I don't think we could even contend with the situation if it weren't for that. So if you know how many people who do your kind of work are in the union, and also whether you and other members in your union have been contacted by these very conservative forces to stop paying your fees.
Yes, I don't know approximately how many home care workers, like as far as internationally, but I know our local alone, I think we have about 13,000 personal assistants in Illinois. As far as being contacted by the White Wing Group, yeah, I have received emails. I have received mailings stating that you can opt out of the union and still get the benefits. Incorrect. It's just another way of them trying to cripple us, and they're basically false leading other home care workers that really not into the organization or don't well enough education about it. But yeah, they have reached out. They have reached out plenty of times.
So they're doing that with
like Illinois Policy Institute is one of them.
They're reaching out to all of the thousands and thousands of teachers across the country, as well as all of the people who would be impacted by the Janus decision, public sector union people. And it's part of the pitch that they'll say, well, don't you want to have another $300 a year more to help your own family pay for grocery bills and all that? It's kind of appealing, isn't it, that the kind of pitch that they make to
they basically, you put more money into broke people's pockets, they're going to think about it like, I'm going to have this much in my pocket. But in reality, they don't want what's good for them. They're basically trying to keep them down. What the union has done thus far, we bargain health care, we bargain better wages. I've seen improvement of people's lives that never had it before, and they're affected by it. But once you don't talk, I don't signed up home care workers back in 2014 when the Harris versus Quinn took place for the fair share. And I don't re-signed up workers back from then, and they didn't know that they wasn't a part of the union no more. They didn't know what happened. So once we educate them, knock on their door, educate them, and let them know what's going on with their jobs and inform them, they sign up. They want to fight. They want to keep their jobs. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto, and then Senator Hassan.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse, thank you so much for this hearing, and Senator Stabenow as well. And thank you to all of you. You don't know this, but I'm from Nevada, which is a right-to-work state, but we have some of the strongest unions in the country, and I am here today because of those unions. And everything that you've said today, I experienced in, and we are experiencing in Nevada. That's why I'm so glad we're having this hearing and so proud to fight alongside of all of you. Let me follow up on a conversation that you started with Senator Hirono about the Koch brothers now after this decision, this Janus decision, now reaching out to public sector workers and saying you don't have to be a part of the union. What are you doing to counter that, if anything? Or do you see a need to counter it? Is there any type of strategy that you're looking at or taking? Just curious. Or is it something we don't want to share?
Well, I can tell you what some people have done. Mm-hmm. We have had members in various different locals who have sent back the emails that they've gotten with words that, you know, if I use them right now, as Professor McLean said, I'd have too much money in my swear jar. So actually individual members and locals have basically sent a whole bunch of things back to these folks saying, don't bother us, you know, I'm going to sue you for invading my privacy. So that's number one. Number two, we're actually looking at a bunch of different legal options. But number three, we are exposing it and exposing who is actually doing this. And what's been interesting in the last few weeks, because there's about 10 lawsuits already, they really want to defund and destabilize us. Mm-hmm. And they particularly want to do it before the November 18 election. And as Professor McLean said, they're smart. But it is and I think you said this, you can see their through line is they want people to have to fend for themselves. They want to disable everything that is about collective work, which is why I also want to just say to Senator Hirono, that work that you did the next day after the Janus decision with the press conference, all of you on the bill, was so important because that sends a counter message. So one, we expose it. Two, we are actually cheering on and telling these stories about post-Janus, and frankly, most of us are not even using the word Janus anymore. We're in some ways just trying to think about how do we do back to school, how do we do engagement, how do we work with governors and mayors and others who want to work with us, and how do we actually show them that their misuse of the law and of the courts are not going to defy people who want to join together.
And that's great, because I think that is the answer that we all need to be doing, is shining a light and showing who is really behind these activities and education. So your discussion earlier on, now we need a strategy that to focus on education and engagement is key. And I think that's why we're all here. We want to make sure we're partnering with you, and you're also telling us what we can do to continue to support that education and that engagement. Four
E's: educate, engage, expose, empower.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's it. And Ms. McLean, thank you for the work that you have done. I think the challenge, listen, when I go into the state of Nevada, people know who the Koch brothers are. And I can tell you in my race, and Maggie's going to say the same thing, Senator Hassan, the Koch brothers spent millions of dollars to defeat me. And there's a reason why. It was for their own political gain. We know that. And I think more that we shine a light, the more that we show what is happening here is going to be key to workers fighting, to individuals fighting for their families, fighting for their communities. So Ms. Marsh, Ms. Benjamin, thank you for being here. SEIU, I sat down with our health workers who have the same concerns that you do, and there is strength in unity. There's strength in coming together, and we do, because of unions, do have, once we have those stronger unions, we do have stronger communities, and that is key. And Ms. Marsh, I cannot thank you enough for not only being a teacher in our system, in our public education system, but fighting for our kids and continuing to fight for other teachers. So thank you for being here. We look forward, and I look forward to continued collaboration and fighting alongside of you.
Well, thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for convening this important hearing, and thank you to all four of our witnesses for your work, for your advocacy, for your commitment to the people of our country and to the concept that when we're a self-governing people or a self-governing union, we can actually come together and decide what we want to do as a team, as a group, to make the American dream possible for all of us. And I thank you, too, for shining a light on the recent anti-worker Supreme Court decision. It is truly an unfortunate victory for corporate special interests at the expense of hardworking Americans. It's that simple. The decision weakens the ability of unions to bargain and fight for good wages and good benefits for workers, undermining efforts to ensure that all of us, and all workers in particular, can share in economic growth. I'm going to continue to fight to protect workers' right to collectively bargain, to expand middle-class opportunity, and ensure that all hardworking Americans have the ability to get ahead and stay ahead. I want to use the rest of my time today to focus on a particular workforce challenge that will likely impact every one of us at some stage of our lives, and that is the one that you represent, Ms. Benjamin, direct care workers. You've talked a little bit about what benefits you and your colleagues have been able to gain by membership of a union. I want to drill down a little bit, too, on what the impact of receiving better pay and benefits means, not only for the workforce, but also for the people you serve in that role. In New Hampshire, it's estimated that 70 to 80% of paid hands-on care for older adults and individuals who experience disabilities is provided by direct care workers, including personal care aides, home health aides, and nursing assistants. And the demand for direct care workers is expected to increase 49% between now and 2022, further exacerbating a workforce shortage that already exists in many communities across my state and across the country. Ms. Benjamin, from your own experience, what do you believe are contributing factors to the shortage of home health care workers? And do you believe that the actions taken to dismantle worker protections will exacerbate the shortage?
I would say the reason why it's a shortage as far as being a home care worker provider, because you can't live off this work.
Right.
There's no future in it. There's no benefits. You basically have to have another job to just make ends meet. What I do believe is that all this money that the billionaires are putting into tear this program down, take that money and put it into the program. Right. Put it into the community.
And in my experience, many families who are served by a direct care worker are in a situation where if it weren't for the direct care worker coming into the home, helping that loved one with a disability or a chronic illness or disease or who's aging, that direct care worker is enabling other family members to go to work and support the family. Am I right?
Yes. So
when there is a shortage of direct care workers, we end up with a situation where more family members may in fact have to give up working themselves and rely on public assistance just in order to keep their loved ones safe.
Exactly, because they don't want to put them into an institute.
Right.
They want to keep them home.
And if they put them into an institution, that too will
that's going to cost more money.
That's right.
We're saving money.
Yeah.
By keeping them in their home, giving them the dignity and the respect that they deserve.
Yeah. So in turn, it's fair, I believe, for workers, direct care workers, for teachers, for all of our public servants to be able to advocate and collectively bargain for dignity in return.
Yes.
Which is really what you're asking for.
That's all we're asking for.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Senator, for convening this hearing again.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse, and thank you and Senator Stabenow for organizing this gathering. Thank you all for your testimony. And I do think it's important that we always remind folks that unions have been the engine of economic opportunity in the United States over a very long period of time. It was the ability of people to come together, to bargain with people who did not want to pay them more, that allowed more people to get more of the productivity that they provided back in the form of wages. And we all know that as unions have diminished in power over a long period of time, that the productivity that workers put into their jobs has not been matched by constantly rising wages. And I think that is the biggest challenge of our time. And it's been, as you said, Professor McLean, a very concerted effort, right? The people who don't want to pay workers more money are determined to undermine the vehicle that empowers those workers, which are unions. You also see it when it comes to the effort to prevent class action lawsuits, right? If you're a big corporation and you take away the ability of a consumer to band together with other consumers to bring a lawsuit, it means that one cheated person against a big corporation, and they don't stand much of a chance. And so we see this in many forms. I am, Ms. Marsh, really interested in a little more detail on how you were successful, right? Because we're looking at Arizona. We also saw these teacher movements in West Virginia. We saw them in Oklahoma. And in the past, the sort of right-wing organizations have been pretty successful at convincing some folks in the public that the unions are just out for themselves. And you were clearly successful in persuading the broader public in Arizona that the public had a stake in helping teachers to succeed, because teachers were also fighting on the front lines to help students succeed. Can you talk a little bit about how you were successful at converting your movement into public support? Because that is going to be essential, it seems to me, as we go into this battle over Supreme Court justices, making those connections. And I'm really curious as to how you did that.
I think a lot of what unfolded started years before. We have a couple of local columnists who have been very much on teachers' side and publishing op-eds. I published an op-ed. I mean, there has been just a lot of kind of bubbling support for the fact that teachers are that in Arizona we have a teacher retention crisis. I mean, we are at crisis proportions. Mm-hmm. We finished the school year with roughly 2,000 classroom vacancies, which means roughly 60,000 kids, if you figure 30, which is actually really conservative, because my classes are not at 30 students per class. And I think that narrative, teachers and the help of other more friendly, powerful people really brought that attention up. So by the time Red for Ed came and teachers walked out, we already had a great deal of public support. And there was one other thing that we did that I think was probably a game changer. And I don't know if other states did this as well, but we had walk-ins. So a couple of weeks before our eventual walk-out, we had walk-ins on Wednesday morning. Teachers wore red. We had signs. We went out of school boundaries, invited the community, and, kind of held signs out in traffic for a while, but then walked in, literally arm in arm, and walked back into campus. And I think that visual of that happening across the state was incredibly powerful, and really had a lot to do with the success of the actual walk out.
Right. And I see in your testimony, you say you believe in the post-Janus world, educator activism is going to grow, which is something that Weingarten has said, because now people realize that you've got a Supreme Court stacked against teachers, and that message was sent loud and clear. And so I know we're all very focused on doing the kind of engagement that Ms. Weingarten talked about, and hoping learn the lessons from your ability to let the public know that when you have all those vacancies, mm-hmm. it is really hurting their kids and the future of the state. And the same is true when you've got hospital workers who are not being paid adequately. It hurts everybody. So I know we're going to follow very closely what what you did, and I know I look forward to continuing the conversation so we can learn those lessons, because you clearly connected the low pay for teachers with the fact that people's kids and the education of their kids was suffering as a direct result, and we need to make sure we make that connection across the board. So.
Our last two members to engage with you are Senator Wyden and Chairman Stabenow. Senator Wyden has a vital position as the ranking member on the Finance Committee in touching on many of the issues that we've talked about, and I couldn't be happier that he's here. And then we'll follow up with our host and the leader of the DPCC, Senator Stabenow.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse, and thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for putting together this very important hearing. I want to thank all our guests as well. We've all been reviewing the record of Mr. Kavanaugh, and he looks to me like, if confirmed, he would be a poster guy for powerful corporate interests and dark money. And you look at his record, for example, his position on net neutrality, which looks to me like a glide path to higher rates for the working families that all of you represent. And it's not as if we don't have incredible challenges right now trying to keep dark money from seeping into the holes in the campaign finance law. We barely held off an effort to repeal the Johnson Amendment, which would have been the biggest gift to dark money since Citizens United. It basically would have allowed the churches to be used to carry out this far-right agenda by, in effect, abusing the tax laws. So all of you have given us very thoughtful presentations, and I think what I would like to ask of you, Ms. McLean, is if he's confirmed, what would you be most worried about with respect to expanding corporate power and dark money? For example, having listened to Senator Whitehouse and other experts, my sense is that a sympathetic court would take Citizens United and say no limits at all, no limits whatsoever, and in effect, senators could practically be sponsored by a powerful corporate interest. They wouldn't have it written on their hand, but for all practical purposes, that would be the case.
Have to wear the pants.
So why don't you, if you would, because you are really an expert on these issues of campaign finance, corporate power, and dark money, tell us what you would be most worried about if this individual was confirmed and seated on the court.
I would, who can predict, but I think the Affordable Care Act is going to be crucial, and I think revisiting a strange piece of Justice Roberts' decision in the Affordable Care Act case will be an occasion for, as I said, undermining interpretation of the Commerce Clause, which has enabled all federal regulation. So Justice Roberts upset many of his colleagues on the right by supporting the Affordable Care Act. And yet he said something very unusual in his decision. He said the Commerce Clause, may not be his exact words, but close, shouldn't be a license to regulate citizens from cradle to grave. It was a very strange comment. No citizens rely on. So I would look to that. I would also say, though,
can I ask you a question about that? Because I think that's very perceptive. You've got 3 members of the Senate Finance Committee who obviously care a lot about the Affordable Care Act. Isn't it the case that depending on what he did with the Commerce Clause, in a case like the one that was making its way through Texas and we believe will end up in the Supreme Court, that could be used as a precedent in terms of the Commerce Clause stretch to do even more damage on health and environmental policy. And the reason I ask that, And Senator Whitehouse, Senator Stabenow, I don't know if you all got into it, but apparently late last night, the White House sent out a sheet with respect to all the cases where Mr. Kavanaugh had ruled in favor of these far-right corporate interests. So I gather that you're concerned about the Commerce Clause, both from the standpoint of the Affordable Care Act and possibly what it might mean as a precedent for even more damage.
Absolutely.
In the environmental and health area.
And I do think the Commerce Clause sounds wonky. I understand pollsters might steer people away from it. But the fact is, it is the framework for so much of what we depend on in our country. And I think we need to help the American people understand that. I also think there's another element that is involved here that we also need to have hard conversations with the American people about. And that is the simple reality that a good and functioning civilized society requires some elements of coercion to function. For example, traffic regulations, right? Speeding tickets, things like that. This use of the First Amendment to say no one should have to pay dues to a labor union because that violates their First Amendment rights to freedom of speech, why can't that be used against our tax system? I would not be surprised if we start seeing libertarian litigation outfits attacking the requirement that people pay taxes for things that they don't support. That could easily be next. So again, I would just come back to these framework questions that I think we will not understand the game plan on the other side if we put these things into issue silos and baskets, but instead we need to think about what is the framework of jurisprudence for a healthy, functioning, sustainable society in our period in the world history.
I'm over my time. I just want to tell you that I would be the first to say that you can't walk into a coffee shop and start people getting all interested in a conversation about the Commerce Clause. But I do think that if people see the government from walking away from common sense health and safety policies, that will be something that Republicans and independents care greatly about. So I hope that you will continue this work as we continue in the days ahead to examine the record of this justice who I believe, based on what I see, and your answers confirm it, really looks like he'd be a poster guy for dark money and powerful corporate interests, and the American people have a right to know the details about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the extra time.
And now the chair of the DPCC, the senator from Michigan, Senator Stabenow.
Thank you very much, Senator Whitehouse, really for a terrific hearing and for all of you being with us. You know, one of the opportunities that we have when we can't have a regular hearing before a committee on something as important as this, we do have the capacity through the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, which actually the policy committees, both a Republican and Democratic policy committee, is actually set up by rule in the United States Senate. And so this is the one committee where we can actually hold a hearing. And I'm so glad that all of you are here. And Senator Whitehouse has done such incredible work for so long on the whole question of dark money and what has happened for us. And I apologize for being late, but through the wonders of Facebook Live, I actually have been listening even when I wasn't here. And so, and we thank everybody who has been listening to us as well. A couple of comments and a couple of questions. When we really think about it, really step back and we look at the years, actually decades of history now of a few multi-billionaires, starting with the Koch brothers, who were concerned about inherited wealth, and they thought that probably wasn't a great thing to try to get the average working person to really rally around how to protect a multi-billionaire's inherited wealth. And then as oil company owners and execs, not liking it in the 70s when the EPA was set up to actually look at how, from a public standpoint, we could protect the air and the water and the land and so on. They decided, well, we better start controlling the rules. I mean, that's basically where this came from. We should control what people hear. So they certainly have outgunned us on who owns radio stations and who owns TV stations, and they now fund endowed chairs at universities so they can say, well, an esteemed professor at Stanford said, you know, whatever they want them to say, right? and then going on to rig various systems, whether it's voter suppression or whether it is trying to rig systems around redistricting. We've certainly seen that in Michigan and other things. And so now we come to one of the most democratic institutions, and that's in organizing and unions. And so the freedom for somebody to decide they want to get together with other workers and be able to stand up for their safety in the workplace and their wages and be able to collectively bargain and so on. So they've gone to the heart of what has been essential, really, for people to be able to stand up and be able to organize. And certainly Michigan is a proud state where unions created the middle class. We like to believe we created the middle class with the automobile and the assembly line. But even in a place like Michigan now, because of the way things have been so rigged, we've seen right to work for less laws pass, and most recently an elimination of prevailing wages in construction projects and so on. So from my perspective, I think people want to know that somebody's got their back, whether that's that the rules are fair, public rules, or whether it's a union. People want to know somebody's got their back and they're not in it by themselves. And the one other thing I would just observe is that the reality is we know when collective bargaining unions go down, the middle class and wages has gone down. And we see in Michigan when we debate things like NAFTA, and our partners are Canada and Mexico. Well, in Canada, we don't have a problem because they have collective bargaining, they have unions, they have environmental rules and so on. And so we have similar standard of living. Mexico, different. In Mexico, it's a race to the bottom. So when a plant moves to Mexico, and I've had CEOs tell me, Michigan can't compete with $1.57 an hour. I actually had a CEO say that a few years ago. That's literally a race to the bottom in terms of standard of living and so on. And you wonder why people are upset and frustrated at what's going on. So there's a lot to this. This is a very, very big deal, which is why I'm really grateful that you are all here and that you have been doing wonderful work where you are. And I'm wondering if, just as we close things out, if each of you could just, again, say what you would like people listening today on Facebook Live, as well as all of us, to do. What would you like us to do? What would you like us to know? What should we know that gives us hope that this can change? So, Ms. Weingarten, let me start with you.
And our vote just started, so
yes.
keep it reasonably short.
So, the most important thing, in my judgment, is when people have the freedom to work together, to aspire together, they can do what individuals can't. And the right wing and these dark money groups are doing everything in their power to disrupt that and defeat that at the bargaining table and the ballot box. But if we expose them, educate members and the broader community, engage people so that they feel their power, not their powerlessness, they will be empowered.
Thank you. Professor McLean.
Mike?
You'd think I'd be trainable as a professor. Anyway, I believe that the American people are good and fair-minded people, and I believe most Americans are deeply frustrated. On issue after issue, majorities have made their will felt. They want to take care of our school systems. They want to pay our teachers more. They want people to have the right to organize. They want to clean up the environment. Again, all these different things, and yet that hasn't been happening. So there's tremendous frustration. I think what we can do is help people understand why the system is not working, how it's been clogged up, how it's been rigged, and then ask people to come together and say, this is a crucial moment, recommit to our society, come together, care about one another, believe in this project that we have, and let's make it work. Let's change the rules so that they actually serve the people and don't serve these interests, and let's figure out how we do that together.
Thank you. Ms. Marsh.
Thank you for hosting this, by the way, or for being the starter of this. Yeah, I think that what I would want the community to know, the broader community, is two things. One, all of this is not a conspiracy theory. This is actually true. We were talking about this ahead of time, like that some of our friends might think we're a little crazy. We're not. This is all true and it's happening. But more importantly, we flat out, and I know this is cliche, but we need people to vote. Yes. If Democrats had voted when they should have for the last 10 years, we would not be in this situation. If the 60,000 people who were down at the Arizona Capitol actually voted, and maybe all of them spent 1 hour on a local campaign, because we can't fix the framework that Nancy's talking about being so broken, but we can slow it down by electing the right people into office.
Thank you. Yes, Ms.
I'm going to piggyback what Ms. Marsh said. As far as the election, it's time to get out and vote. In order for change to happen, we got to make it happen. We need the laws that's going to work for us and not against us. SEIU is a platform for me to be the voice for 13,000 personal assistants. So when I come knocking on your door, open it, because that's how we get down. Thank you guys for having me here.
Thank you so much, and thank you again.
Let me wrap up, since we have just a few minutes left. This hearing has touched on a lot of topics, but it's related fundamentally to the Janus decision and to the sentiment many of us have that that decision was a pet political project by the 5 Republican judges on the court, that they went out of their way to signal to the big special interest lawyers that they would undertake this task for their corporate clients. And then we went through the whole Friedrichs saga and then into Janus. So it's really a 3-case, long-term project that shows all sorts of bizarre signals. I am a lawyer. I have been a litigator. I was my state's attorney general. I was my state's United States attorney. I was legal counsel of the governor. I was a staff lawyer doing cases in the attorney general's office. I have never in my life seen a case in which somebody deliberately went into court to lose. Please, Your Honor, let us lose so that we can rush up to what we think is going to be such a friendly reception at the Supreme Court that we're willing to have the record of this case have a loss below because we're so confident that these judges are baked in for us that we don't care. That is a very peculiar set of facts, and that ought to be an alarm bell about where this Supreme Court is. This is a Supreme Court that 5-4 installed a Republican president in Bush versus Gore, stopping the national election process. We have a president right now who was not elected by the popular vote. Our candidate won the popular vote. Back in 2010, the Jubilee decision, 5 Republican judges of the Supreme Court, again, opened up the opportunity for what was called the Red Map program. The Red Map program allowed bulk gerrymandering of the entire congressional delegation from a battleground state. The result of the decision by the Supreme Court, followed up by the Republican Red Map Project, was that in 2010, Congress went Democrat in the popular vote by over 1 million votes, but went Republican because of the gerrymander by over 30 seats. So we have had cases in which the popular vote has not been respected at the presidency because of a variety of machinations. We have had situations in which the popular vote was not respected in the makeup of Congress because of gerrymandering that was cleared in advance by the Jubilee decision of the Supreme Court. And right now, the leader of the Senate, the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, is the majority leader because dark money, artillery barrages of negative commercials took out 3 Senate candidates so early in the process that they didn't have the chance to get their campaigns up and running in an effective way. And it was enormous amounts of the dark money that the Citizens United decision, the 5 judges of the Supreme Court, had put in place that then were deployed to take out Bayh and Strickland and Feingold. And had those 3 seats gone the other way, Chuck Schumer would be the majority leader right now, and we wouldn't be having this conversation about a far-right extremist being appointed on a mission given by the president to undo Roe versus Wade. And even though we still do not control the Senate, notwithstanding all of this, nevertheless, Democrats in the Senate represent 40 million more Americans than Republicans in the Senate do because of the built-in small state bias of the Senate, largely in the American West. So we need to have the courage of our convictions. To your point, Ms. Weingarten, we need to understand that we are actually not really in the minority. We got more votes for the presidency than Trump did. In the past, we have won the House, but not actually got the House because of machinations and gerrymandering. And right now in the Senate, we represent more Americans than they do. So we need to be ready to stand up and have some confidence about who we represent and what we can do. And what you have said and what we've seen the teachers do in states where many of us felt that was highly improbable has been just fantastic and inspiring and proves what can be done. So thank you all so much for your testimony. Thank you for participating in this hearing, and we will conclude with that. I'm very appreciative of all the witnesses and so many colleagues who attended. Thank you so much. It was a really big turnout by our caucus. Thank you. Shows that it matters. With that, we are adjourned.